Good evening, everyone. My name is Young-Ok An, and I'm director of the Luan Dummer Center for Women at the University of St. Thomas. On behalf of all of us at the Women's Center, I'd like to give you a warm welcome to our signature event. I'm thrilled to see that so many of you came from all over town to hear our speaker, Anne Bancroft, an Arctic explorer, environmentalist, charity organization founder, and educator. We'll start the program with a welcome by the president of the University of St. Thomas, Dr. Julie Sullivan.
Thank you. Well, welcome to the University of St. Thomas. It is such a pleasure to see so many of our own faculty and staff and students, as well as so many community members. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Tonight's lecture illustrates the vibrant educational forums the university hosts to widen the horizons of not only our university community, but far beyond. The Luan Dummer Center for Women has been a beacon for the university since 1993. It provides resources to faculty, staff, students, and community. It bears the late Dr. Luan Dummer's name. Dr. Luan Dummer came to St. Thomas in 1971. She was the first female chairperson of the Department of English and the first director of the Women's Studies program. When she passed in 1992, she left the bequest that made the Women's Center possible. The Luan Dummer Center for Women aims to empower women and educate our broader community on gender equity, diversity, and social justice. Through offering this lecture series and many other programs, the center honors Luan's enduring vision and legacy. This 2019 Women's History Month lecture marks the 26th year of our distinguished lecture series. The lectures have been given by nationally and internationally acclaimed women speakers on topics ranging from women's history to feminist politics, from literature to journalism, from science to world health and environmental sustainability. As the first female president of this university, I feel that I'm in a unique position to be aware of pioneering women who aspired to be writers, educators, leaders, and change makers. Whether we are administrators, faculty, staff, or students, we are indebted to all those who worked hard, including those behind the scenes, to enable today's students, regardless of their gender, to pursue and achieve their dreams. Tonight's speaker, Anne Bancroft, is an inspiring example for us, not only as a pioneer and explorer, but also as an educator. In fact, Anne and Luan have a lot in common, including leaving a legacy for future generations. As Luan's influence is felt through the Luan Dummer Women's Center work and programs, Anne is making a similar impact through the Anne Bancroft Foundation that inspires and funds many young women in Minnesota. Thank you. In closing, I'd like to share a quote from Bancroft's book, No Horizon is So Far, that resonates with all of us in higher education. And I quote, "The true journey of any expedition is the journey of the mind. Navigating that terrain depends not on physical skill or muscle, but on character." Now I would like to welcome to the stage our a cappella group, Cadenza. Thank you.
spell on me. You got me rooted in the ground like an old tree. Hey, it's all good, can't you see? You got the magic that set me free. Baby, you drive me so crazy. Baby, you drive me so crazy. Baby, you drive me so mad. You run around town like a woman on a warpath. You got some magic touch. You got the hands to make them a buckle and blush. Blood runs fast, you make it rush. I'm gonna live forever and it hurts so much. Baby, you drive me so crazy. Baby, you drive me so crazy. Baby, you drive me so mad. You got me running around town like a woman on a warpath. There was a time when you went howling over me, but then the darkness fell and now it's all I see. Baby, you drive me so crazy. Baby, you drive me so crazy. Baby, you drive me so mad. You got me running around town like a woman on a warpath. Baby, you drive me so crazy. Baby, you drive me so crazy. Baby, you drive me so mad. You got me running around town like a woman on a warpath.
Thank you, Cadenza. Cadenza aims to tap the collective spirit of a cappella music and bring the community together through songs. It's wonderful to greet all of you again, hardy Minnesotans. This winter really tested us, but we endured. We now have a taste of what the Arctic weather is like. In fact, on one of those relentlessly cold days this February, I heard the news that it was colder here than Antarctica. Ha, I thought, and Bancroft, we are all like you, beating the Arctic chill day in and day out. Then I read her book, No Horizon is So Far, that chronicled her and Norwegian explorer Liv Arnesen's journey across Antarctica. They walked at times 8 hours a day, dragging 250 pounds of supply sleds, being on high alert for 90 days, at times enduring bodily injuries. Well, that's a little bit different from crouching in a comfy chair, peering out to watch the icicles getting longer in the midst of thickening snow. Indeed, what Anne has accomplished as an explorer is massive. In 1986, she was the first woman to have made the trip to the North Pole, and in 1992, she led the first American women's crossing of Greenland east to west. In 2001, she skied across the continent of Antarctica with Liv Arnesen. It was a first for women, and they also set a distance record. So Anne is the first known woman to cross the ice to both the North and South Poles. Anne's passion for exploring our natural world is matched by her enthusiasm for teaching children. She has been dedicated to sharing stories from her expeditions to inspire youth and people around the world to follow their dreams and create change. Their Antarctic journey was followed by 3 million school kids around the world. These school children were inspired by the lessons learned in some of the harshest and most rapidly changing natural environments on Earth. I was particularly impressed by Anne's teamwork and leadership skills that shattered female stereotypes. As soul sisters, Anne and Liv underwent severe tests during their polar expeditions, and their tenacity and courage have earned them worldwide recognition as today's role models, especially for women and girls. They were avid readers when they were young, and they found their passions in athletic activities and explorations. They nurtured their dreams while fighting cultural stereotypes about women. They both became teachers first before they responded to the call of the wild. And after their expeditions, they both became authors. Liv's first book was called Nice Girls Don't Ski to the South Pole. As to Anne's publication, in addition to the book No Horizon is So Far, there is Poles Apart educational film and curricular, and she co-produced many programs to share the lessons she learned in the remote and faraway places to empower youth. In that spirit, Anne founded the Anne Bancroft Foundation, a nonprofit organization that empowers girls to imagine something bigger and helps them reach their full potential. I understand that in the audience here, there are some of those who have been funded by Anne's foundation. Over and over, Anne emphasizes the importance of finding and nurturing one's passions. In the book, there is a deeply moving passage, quote, "Human beings are all driven to create, to express ourselves in what we do. It just so happens that my talents are greatest in athletics, outdoor trekking, and mental stamina. For me, an expedition is a work of art expressed on a canvas of snow, air, and time." Anne is also committed to environmentalism as an eyewitness to the splendors and majesty of nature. Her devotion to preservation of our precious natural resources resonates through her work. Now some logistics. Anne's talk will be about 50 minutes, followed by a question and answer session for about 20 to 25 minutes. You in the audience are invited to participate in the Q&A session. And afterwards, there will be an announcement of the result of the photo contest that the Women's Center and Create Space co-sponsored. Afterwards, Anne will be signing the copies of a book in the lobby reception area. Now, please join me in welcoming Anne Bancroft.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be back on campus, and thank you for those warm wishes, both of you. I've had a splendid day. I have been in the Luann Dummer Center this afternoon with students and staff, and just a wonderful, intimate setting. And I had a terrific dinner with the committee, and so it's been an extraordinarily lovely day here on campus. And I just say this in part because it's very unusual to have such an intimate look into your
your world here. I oftentimes just scoot up to the podium and tell a few stories and a bad joke or two, and then I'm off. And so I feel like I've had a wonderful getting to know you session, and what a special place this center is, carved out in the middle of this majestic campus of yours. And so thank you for welcoming me here for this special occasion. And hopefully, one day we'll get to a place where it just isn't Women's History Month, it's just women's history. But we'll get there. There's more work for us to be doing. So what I want to do tonight, I have so much to say. And I keep telling everyone today that I'm an introvert, but you're not going to see it. But I won't utter a word tomorrow. I'll just be absolutely played out. But when we were talking about topics that we could talk about and all that it goes into an expedition, there's so many themes that you can extract. It's get your sleeping bags out. I've got lots to say. And so I'm going to hurry through a variety of things with the help of the expeditions themselves, because I think that they're the place, they've been my classroom. They've been the place where I have learned so much about myself, about the world that we all exist in, and the work that I want to do going forward. And so the best way I know how to do it is to sort of share some of those stories. And when you're 63, you get to look back. And when you've been exploring publicly for 30 plus years, you just get to tell all the stories you want to. But I'll behave myself, because I do know that Will Steger went to this establishment, and so I don't want anything to come back to me. So I'm going to start way back where it really all began for me, and that was 1986. I was an elementary school teacher in South Minneapolis in 1985, and I went to my principal, and I had only been teaching 4 years, and I asked for a year off, sort of a sabbatical year, and she looked at me like I was out of my mind. And it was the year of the space shuttle disaster, and so she rethought the first no or two that she sent my way, and realized somewhere in there that as we were watching a woman and a teacher on a grand adventure gearing up to go up into the space shuttle, it hadn't happened yet, but it was all the headlines. She started to think, and she just had more going on than I gave her credit for at the time, because she was saying no to me. And then she turned around and she said, "You can go." Because I didn't want to give up this job. I loved this school so much and the staff that I was working with. And I think it was because of the space shuttle and that teacher that I got my opportunity. She put together a teacher, a woman on a grand adventure. And she gave me the nod, and I interviewed for a place on this crazy team with 7 men and 49 male dogs. I've been saying it all afternoon. I haven't said it in a long time, and it's really fun. It's very liberating. 7 men and 49 male dogs. And me. And we went off on a grand adventure, and that's what's in this picture. We trained in northern Minnesota and Canada, and the short of it is, I'll get right to the trip. And in 1986, this is March 8th of 86, and we're heading from the tip of Canada. We've just left Canada, and we're going out into the Arctic Ocean. And like every trip that we've all been on, large or small, short or long, your heart is filled with possibility when you're setting out. Your suitcase is a little bit too heavy, or your pack, or your sled, but you're just filled with a sense of possibility and excitement. And that's the way we were. Only it was 80 below, and nothing worked very well at that temperature, and the sun only came up for 20 minutes. And then it got dark, and we were pulling and pushing our sleds with headlights, and we thought we were never going to be warm again in our lives. After 8 hours of pushing and pulling and laboring, we got out and we started to do the math, and we had only made a mile that day. And all that possibility went crashing into the pot that was cooking the noodles that night for dinner. And it really was to set the tone for the rest of the 57 days that we would be on the Arctic Ocean. It was going to be a long, hard slog. And very little, as most expeditions will prove out, goes according to plan. But it was glorious. This is what we looked like. We were 8 people, 49 dogs. The 50th dog decided not to go when we were in Lower Canada and turned around. So we had an odd number. And the ice is really turbulent in the beginning because the currents are bashing up against Canada and crushing up. You kind of see this on Lake Superior about this time of year when the waves come crashing in and then freeze. It just builds up. And these pressure ridges, as they're called, are 60, 80-foot walls. They're like the ceiling. And we go up ahead and we hack some sort of semblance of a path with our pickaxes, and then we start trying to encourage the dogs to go up and over them with our 1,500-pound sleds. We're unsupported, so we've got everything but the kitchen sink. The guy in the red pants is one of the team members, and he's pulling back on the lines. And what he's doing is he's bringing all the dogs, the 10 dogs, into two-wheel drive. And then he'll yell a series of 3 commands. They could be as simple as hup hup, or they could be some naughty words, whatever worked for your particular team. And then you snap those lines, and all people available get behind the sled, and all the dogs go into 4-wheel drive and try and go up that mountain ridge of ice to get to the top and then to come crashing down to the bottom to do it again. And this we would do hundreds of times in a day. So you can see why we only made a mile sometimes. It was very slow-going work. But it demands total teamwork. And not just teamwork, because the people get all the accolades on these kind of trips, but also with the dogs, that we have to work in concert with them. If you've ever dog sledded and you've seen the lead dog sit down and all 9 of the others sit down, that is a very effective strike, because nothing happens. Nothing at all. So you've got to work with your dogs. And I'm an elementary school teacher by trade, and so I felt like I was just in the classroom again, where the kid, you don't like everybody all the time, and some kids are mischievous and some are sulking. The dogs are exactly like this. They're just like us. The ocean is an alive, wonderful world to live and work on, because it is never the same at any given moment. It is ocean underneath all of that frozen ice. And we go in the early spring because there's still ice, at least in those days. And it can change because of those currents, as well as the wind on top of the ice. So the currents are so strong. So these huge Iowa cornfields could all of a sudden just separate and open up. And we were presented, even at 50, 60 below, with open water. So it really sort of does a number on your brain, because you always think of thawing or warmer temperatures for the ice to split, but that's not what's pulling them apart. It has nothing to do with temperature. There are no bridges in the Arctic, so you've got to figure out, be somewhat creative about how you get across. They don't all look like this. Some can be as wide as the Mississippi River. And so you've got to either wait for them to come back together again, or you go up and down and try and find a way to get across. And every day was different. It was a new, creative problem to solve. In this picture, this is me, the midget of the group, am hearkening back to my high school long jump experience. And I have to say, I didn't excel at long jump. But when there's a very frozen ocean under you, you really become quite light. And I did make it across this baby. This trip taught me so much. I can't even begin to tell you. It's a book someday that I've got to read. I've got to write. When we got to the top, we were 6 people and 20 dogs. We had sent out dogs that were no longer needed as the sleds got lighter. In the old days, of course, they used to shoot the dogs and use them as dog food. Very efficient, but not something for the 80s, nor for me. We had 2 team members leave because of injury, so there were just 6 of us at the top of the world. We went on this trip just following our own dreams for wanting to do it for a whole host of, there were 6 different reasons for wanting to go. But we all were following our own personal ambition to joining on to this trip. Nobody knew who we were. We weren't professional explorers. We were just people coming together for a common goal and to experience this splendor. But the trip changed us in so many ways, and all for different reasons, too many to go into tonight. But we wrote a statement when we were sitting at the top of the world where there is no flag or pole or anything. So you just kind of hang out there and trust that you're there. And we wrote this statement to try and express the weight of thoughts that were coming through us at that moment, in our exhaustion and in our excitement, actually, to be frank, about wanting to go home and eat something decent and talk to somebody other than one of the other of us that we've all been living together for short of a year. And so I want to read just a sliver of this passage because it sort of sets up for me a little bit about where I went from there. And I'm reading this on May 1st of 1986 in this picture. The journey across the polar sea was filled with paradox. Surrounded by the gentle pastel beauty of the ice, snow, and low-lying sun, we endured the hardest work and most hostile conditions any of us have ever experienced. At times, there were tears of despair when obstacle after obstacle seemed to spell defeat. At times, we were overwhelmed by exhilaration as we made major breakthroughs. But most of the time, I can't even read my own writing in my journal. I must have been crying. But most of the time, we just worked very hard, wrestling every mile of forward progress from the sea ice. We experienced pain, cold, hunger, and fatigue. For us, the significance of this is that we're able to better empathize with people all over the world for whom these are daily experiences, much of their lives, and who deserve the world's attention more than we do. On a brighter note, this journey reaffirmed for us that hope springs eternal. In our moments of despair, we always found reason to persevere, as we, 6 adventurers from different parts of the world, stand where the lines of longitude of all countries meet, believe that this journey stands for hope, hope that other seemingly impossible goals can be met by people everywhere. It's a little bit of an entree to what was happening within me, standing at the top of the world, exhausted as the first known woman to stand there and not really having an opportunity to digest it because I'm not talking to anybody. I'm so isolated. And you're not going to talk to those guys, for God's sake. Things were starting to already shift for all of us. But for me, that was something that started to ring true and then to take root as I came home and started to digest this experience that was, I don't want to diminish it, but in a way was sort of a lark. It was just something, we cooked together, and we were just the stew of the people that wanted to do it. And we came home from this moment at the top of the world, and we were met by hundreds of people on the tarmac of the St. Paul airport when you could rush out to a plane with propellers onto the tarmac. And the world started to change for us, and we were not equipped for that change. The first thing that I did after taking a shower and eating a lot of different foods that I hadn't had in a year was to go back to my school in South Minneapolis. It was a K-8 school, and it was May, so it was still in session. I'll never forget this day. I had a retiring husky with me. He was 85 pounds, a half an ear, one blue eye, one brown eye, scars all over himself because of all these fights and all this hard life as a dog in front of a sled, and it was 85 above zero. and neither one of us are equipped for this sudden change of temperature. And I cross the street in Uptown and I go over to my school, and it was my epiphany, is the only way I can describe it, because I walked in and the hallways were covered in artwork where they had been learning about Inuit art, the high Arctic, the people of the high Arctic. There were dog sled pictures, of course, things that captivated kids and continue to captivate kids. But I sat down in my gym, and the kids all came in and they sang songs about the Arctic and our expedition. They read poetry to me that they had written about the Arctic and our journey. It was incorporated in every aspect of this school community. Granted, it was a small little community, this little Barton school, but it was in math, science, geography, the arts. It was everywhere. And I realized at that moment so profoundly, so deeply, that I could be a teacher outside of the four walls. And my path suddenly changed. It didn't feel that sudden at the time, but in looking back, my nose was pointed in a new direction. And I realized I could mix my passion, my two passions, passion for education and passion for the out of doors, and all that it had to offer. And that the out of doors could be my classroom. It could be the vehicle to bring the same lessons home to young people that I was finding out on the ice. And so that was the beginning. I promised myself at that moment that if I ever went on another public expedition, different from my canoe trips up in the Boundary Waters in winter or summer, different than other trips that I was doing, but public expeditions, that I must do something that is bigger than my own personal goals. And the only way as a teacher I knew how to demonstrate it something bigger was through education. Well, lo and behold, I started thinking about Antarctica, because that was my dream as a young girl. At the age of 10, I found The Endurance, a book on my parents' bookshelf about Ernest Shackleton. Many people know about this dude. And he had a dream similar to mine, to go across Antarctica. His was never actualized. But his story captivated me as a young person, and I've been on that path ever since. So he's just really mucked up my world. So I started to put together an all-women's trip to Antarctica in chasing of that dream. And the very first thing I did was go to my colleagues around the city and write some grants to write some curriculum. And that was the beginning. Now, this is in the early 90s, and there is no internet. I always have to remind people, because we don't remember those days, and half of you in this room weren't even born then. But there was no internet to move this material. So it was very grassroots, educator to educator across the United States, parent to parent. And that's how it just sort of transpired. We had 350 kids go with us to Antarctica. That felt like the earth moved for me, from going from 30 to 350,000. And so that was sort of it. And this is a small group of them. These kids in the bow ties, by the way, are called the Tuxedo Penguins. It's a St. Paul school, St. Paul Expo. My team is actually in this picture, but you don't see us because we're about the size of fifth graders. So we blend right in. And this is the night before we're leaving for Antarctica. And these kids have already been out giving slideshows. This is pre-PowerPoint as well. So they're with their little carousel, and they're communicating to other schools about what we are about to do. And they're educating their peers on Antarctica and all the complexities of this amazing continent at the bottom of the world, and working on their presentation skills. It was fantastic. So they send us off, and we're launched. But before we go, like every expedition, there are years before that are in preparation. I always remind young kids that dreams don't come quickly nor easily. You have to do your homework. And so we spend an inordinate amount of time compared to the expeditions themselves getting ready. And what that means is not just physically getting yourself in shape, but it's working on your nutrition and your diet. In fact, my nutritionalist is here somewhere tonight. So it's getting the right kinds of calories in your body to make that machine work for all those months on the ice, doing incredibly hard work. We have a wonderful opportunity to intersect with other communities. So we worked with a lot of universities, particularly, really looking at both psychological and physiological aspects of the makeup of each team member, kind of filling in the dearth of research that has been done, or at that point hadn't been done, on women for women. And that was really fun for us as well, because we're not nutritionalists, we're not scientists, but we get to intersect with these worlds and learn not only about ourselves, but many, many other things as well that we can apply going forward. So we're on treadmills for the University of Minnesota, the University of Utah, and they're poking and prodding and finding out what we're made of, and how does this trip and this kind of high-fat diet change you, if at all, as you go along. And then how do you process all of this stress? So that's the psychological aspect that the University of Minnesota was particularly looking at. I didn't get the questions right in the questionnaire, so they studied us all the way through 2000. And then they've given up on me. So off we then finally go with that knowledge and with that backbone off to Antarctica. And so that story is a little bit about the kinds of partnerships that you forge, but it also gives me the opportunity to say and to remind people that you often see pictures like this, but that is not a representation of what goes into our team on many layers doing these expeditions. So every expedition has a whole slew of volunteers and people that are supporting the mission that you're trying to achieve. Sometimes that's just getting to the pole. Sometimes it's the education. It's participating in the technologies and the pace of the change of those technologies each and every expedition. And nutrition is one of those. The gizmos and learning how to use the gizmos, moving our message out. These don't happen when we're just all by ourselves on the ice. And then the last group, besides your family and friends and all the people that are helping you actualize your dream, are the students themselves. They're a population, they don't necessarily feel like they're a part of your team. But when I was on Antarctica the first time and I carried that quilt, let's see, where's that quilt? This little quilt that they presented us, and I didn't want to carry this quilt because I'm pulling a sled with all this weight. It was one little piece of weight I didn't want to add to my sled. But every time I saw that quilt on my sled, I saw 350,000 kids. And I felt them cheering me on. So when I didn't feel like I could do it, they were my cheering section. And so they were a part of the team for me. And my team members felt this way. And this would go on not just from this expedition, but repetitively. So there is a groundswelling of support that we see, even though we might be 4 or 6 or 2 or solo, for that matter. We have a huge team behind us ensuring that we're safe and successful, and that the messages and the things that we want to have happen within the confines of these expeditions can happen. They don't happen just with us. I love this picture. This is 1993 because it's the Southern Hemisphere, so we start in November and we end in January or February. So you got 2 years, you straddle. It's really fun. Except for Christmas is kind of lonely because you're far away from home. But so we're at the South Pole. This is January 14th. This is my shrimpy little team. Tallest member is 5'6", and then the shortest is 5'2". And this is 1992, 93 when we do this. And I like this picture not because we're just standing at the South Pole, it's because there are no patches on our jackets. The only patch you see is our expedition patch. no one would sponsor us. It hadn't been done by women before. This was 1992. It was the decade of women. I don't know who claims these national themes, but it was the 90s were the decade for women, the environment, and education. And I thought I had hit the trifecta when I was starting to fund for this. We were all women. We were going to pack out all our garbage, which was a relatively new thing for such a faraway expedition. Old expeditions would just put their trash in the crevasse or something like that. We had this educational component, which was a new thing. And we still couldn't get anybody stirred up in New York to sponsor us. And after 4 years of really trying. And it wasn't just me, we had some professionals asking, but it was a hard slog. But we got to Antarctica because people bought our t-shirts, fathers of daughters. We had bake sales. We did it the old-fashioned women way. And we somehow got enough pennies scraped together, and even kids were collecting pennies for us. And we got ourselves to Antarctica. We didn't go across Antarctica because we were standing here and we had all the food we needed. I was in the best shape of my life. It'll never happen again. It was just so perfect. And we had all the fuel and the weather was cooperating, but we had no money. And when you've run out of money at halfway through your venture, you've got two options in my mind. You could go on and be stubborn, which I tend to do, and get to the other side, all things considered. But then you've got to thumb your way off the continent because you don't have enough money to hire someone to either fly you off or hook onto a ship. In this environment, that is a huge burden. So there are vehicles leaving the continent in early February, but they're ships with scientists on them and staff that facilitate those bases. They don't have extra space. They would take you because you're stinky and pathetic looking, and you haven't eaten anything. But I started to think, with huge crocodile tears in my eyes, that this was the absolute wrong legacy to leave 350,000 kids who are watching us. Is that the right decision? And I knew immediately it wasn't, but I didn't like that I knew that. And I wanted to change my mind. So I walked around the pole a bunch of times and said, I've been around the world. And I couldn't get away from the fact that I knew it was the right decision, that this is something that I would teach in my class, so how could I live it in another way? And as painful as turning away from your ambition and all the elements that seem so right, and the injustice of what it felt like at that moment to not have enough money to proceed, and that was the barrier. That's never been a barrier before. It's usually, lack of food or storms or something like that pull an explorer off. We turned around and we came home. And we had mixed feelings about how we felt about that, but we turned around and we came home. And it wasn't until we got back to Minnesota and we read a couple of the editorials and met many people like you, and particularly the kids that wrote us, that we realized it was truly the right decision, that people would say, you made the right decision. These are not decisions that are made often in this direction, and thank you. And it was usually a fifth grader or a young person that straightened us out. But there's always a silver lining, isn't there, in all of these things? I was saying earlier at the Dummer Center that it's usually our setbacks and our challenges and our failures, whatever lexicon you put on your challenges, that are the richest, most rewarding, most memorable stories. That moment, this moment on January 14th, 1993, changed my life. It was a lesson that would never, ever leave me on any decision that I made going forward. It wanted to sometimes, but it wouldn't. The silver lining, in some respects, was this goofy woman in the red hat. and that's Liv Arnesen. It brought me to her. Had we gone forward, I wouldn't have sought out this crazy woman to go across Antarctica 7 years later, 8 years later. We met, she went to the South Pole the year after, very similar route, all by herself. And that's what the book, No Good Girls Don't Go to the South Pole, is all about, is her solo expedition. It pretty much mirrored our expedition. We did it in 67 days. She did it in 50 days. It was just beautifully executed. It's like a typical Norwegian, flawless. And I thought, if when I climbed out of bed, I thought, well, I'm going to go back to Antarctica. I still have this burning desire. That's who I want to go with me. And so I pretended that I had a whole list of women candidates to go on the team. When I was talking with her, and fortunately she said yes, because I had no plan B. And I had this wonderful group in Minneapolis helping us execute this huge plan. We had 6 remarkable people in the warehouse districts in Minneapolis, and they impressed her. So I don't think it was me, a little bit about the project, but it was mostly those 6, because what explorer has 6 talented people willing to sacrifice their careers to get behind you to pull this baby off? And then the educational component. We are like sisters. She calls us sister spirits or sister souls. We're still working together, which is a testament to our friendship. But I think what really bonded us together right out of the gates was the similarity in the way in which we were raised. Our parents didn't clip our wings as young girls. We had wacky dreams. We wanted to go across Antarctica. We wanted to be like those early explorers that were igniting us in these books, in the pages of these books. This is Liv as a little girl in a stream, and that's her little boat floating down. If you know anything about Norway, you'll know Tur Heyerdahl and the Kon-Tiki expedition. I remember it captivated me on the cover of National Geographic when I was a kid. That's her Kon-Tiki fleet. She got seasick right out of the gates, and so she had to shift to the poles. Their other huge area of history, because Roald Amundsen was the first to the South Pole. But she had the same dream. She's 2 years older. She's opening the same books. She's an ocean away, and fundamentally our parents are bringing us up in the same spirit. I'm back here in Minnesota and with a winter similar to this one. Am I the only one, by the way, excited for Saturday? I am so pumped. Okay, just buck up. It's going to be okay. It's even light out at 5. No whining. So I'm doing the same thing in Minnesota as a little kid, and I'm going out the back door and I'm filled with imagination, and I'm thinking, I am a weird person, and I was a weird kid, and I was dreaming about pulling sleds and dog-sledding and skiing and being an Inuit, and it was crazy. But then I had the space to do that, and so we had this bedrock that was similar, from our upbringing to the books we read to being educators, and I think almost most importantly to, as adults, to being women who were first in the polar regions, Liv being the first solo woman to the South Pole, and feeling a responsibility to that platform that we were now standing upon. That's the way I describe it. And wanting to do something with that other than just hitting the next summit. And so that's really why she signed on, I think, was because of the educational component, because it was expressing that sense that I can go on a passionate, grand adventure, but at the same time, I can open up a world to young people, which is what I love as well. Somebody asked me earlier today, how do you train to pull 250-pound sleds? In the summer, you put a bunch of tires together and you drag them around for about 4 or 5 hours until you can't do it anymore. And it's the greatest gym in the world. If Liv comes to visit, you notice she's got the tractor tire. I've got 3 economy-size tires. and the dog is bored because you don't go fast. So it's both our psychological training to be serious, and it's also our physical training. So it's very boring, and it's very slow and long. And so I tend to play worst case scenarios over and over again in my mind as I'm doing it, because my theory is, and I got a lot of wacky theories, but my theory is that if you play out those scenarios and solve those problems in your mind, if and when they come up on an expedition, you'll automatically just go into solving. You're not, scratching your head. That's my theory. I had to put in a map. This isn't the greatest map, but we started up at the top of Antarctica. It's all kind of relative, right? Because everything's north. That's the part of Antarctica that's closest to South Africa, just to give you a geographical idea. In 92, 93, we started here and went to the pole. The pole is in the T. And then the idea, that's the traditional route because it's shorter. Well, Liv and I were in a warm room with a map and probably a glass of wine, and we decided to go the long way across. And I've never been great at math, so I just wasn't thinking about the amount of daylight days and the amount of miles that one can make in a day. And so if you do this just by pulling a sled, in 100 days you would have to ski all day long. So we had to look for another mode of transportation, and that was a sail. So we started working with a sailmaker, a woman sailmaker in Norway. She makes sails for ships, and we said, can you start maybe designing something that can pull us if the wind is tolerable? And so we started experimenting with that before we went to Antarctica, and that would give us the extra boost to make all those crazy miles and get to the other end. Again, another theory. You don't fully let yourself believe that it's going to come true, because so many things could step in your way to squelch that. So we land. We've hired a plane, and inside the plane is nothing but fuel tanks. And then us and our little sleds. And these Russian guys are flying us. There's these 15 Russian guys. They land on the ice. There's no runway. There's no buildings. There's nothing here. And they spend the next few hours rolling all the fuel drums out of the plane and then plugging them up and then filling the plane back up. Meanwhile, the plane never stops its engines for fear that it won't get started again. This is not their dream, so they're just not into being here. And we're filling our fuel tanks and everything and loading our sleds up and trying to squeeze everything into them because they're way too full. And all of a sudden, the engines start to change a little bit in sound, and the back door goes up. There were no hugs or, kiss, kiss. You know how Russian guys are. I'm thinking this is going to be a long goodbye. And they just shut the door, and the engines rev up, and we take cover, and that plane just heads back to Cape Town, South Africa. And we are suddenly just the two of us. And the wind. There are no penguins here. There's just nothing that's too sexy. And so there's nothing else to do but to dig in and start doing it. And, if you can see behind the glasses that have been blown down over my face, I'm actually smiling. I'm happy to be here. It doesn't happen every day, but this is my dream. And even though it's really hard work and there's some rough days, especially in the beginning. You're all smiles until you're not. Liv hates this picture because, those Nordics, they don't look so stoic, but, it's the cold fingers that we've all experienced these last couple of months. So it's just a little bit of a short-term ouch, which will heal. We want to be very aware of our environment, and it sounds ridiculous when I'm even hearing myself right now say this, but you'd think you'd be aware in all of this wind and everything of the changes. But when your head is down and you're pulling for 8 or more hours and you're just focused on knocking off another mile and the wind is like this, you don't always sense that it's maybe picking up and that there's some danger lurking around the corner. The danger is that if we don't get the tent up, and there's only one tent, safely and get inside and take shelter, we're going to get to a place where maybe we won't be able to do that. And so it's an instant when that sort of happens. So you have to always stay a little bit on edge in these long days that you have and these long months. And so we're just simply nailing down. This is a storm coming up the glacier to go into the interior. We stake our sleds with stakes that are about as tall as this podium, drive them in. We don't let anything blow away or you won't see it again. I mean, Antarctica is the size of the United States and Mexico combined, so it's a big piece of real estate. When you're in that little hot dog bun, you're pretty happy. And so, the storm gets pushed away, and it's just a little nylon tent that you would take to the Boundary Waters, but it is our home. And you suddenly feel safe and warm, or somewhat warm, and happy to be there and zip up that door. When the storm finishes, the sun comes back out, just like any camping trip, you're on your way again. And you're anxious because miles are driving us. We're sort of obsessed with knocking off miles all the time. This is a very long, huge goal that we've decided to put in front of us. These are the sails. This is what it looks like on a nice day. There are no movies of our sailing because you'd get seasick. We weren't very successful because you really just bounce around. It's a little bit like water skiing, it's a little bit like dog sledding, and then there's a whole area that's nothing like you've ever done before. And behind you is that 250-pound sled just bouncing around, and you're that middle fulcrum between the sail and the sled. It's kind of crazy. You love it and you hate it, but you make more miles. This is what it looks like to pull, and it's really can be uncomfortable after 14 hours in a day. Let's see if I can show you a little reality. I weigh I think I was about 125 pounds. This is a 250-pound sled, and I'm trying to get over a speed bump. It's nothing big. They come in all sizes, but the sled is the boss. This is a very dry environment, so you hear the squeaking. Roald Amundsen's talked about the Antarctic ice being like a sandy beach, like sandpaper, because it's a cruel element that holds your sled runners back. So you're not getting that glide that you cross-country skiers so love. It's just a grind. So that would be our 14-hour workday. And somehow we like to do this. So we would, after this, you'd start to dream about a sailing day, and then as your knees are screaming from bouncing over the moguls and sailing at 20 miles an hour, you're crying from that, and you want to go back to pulling. So you're just never in a happy place. This is what we look like going to work. This is Liv. I'm the good-looking one. Good thing there was only 2 of us. I always knew who I was looking at. When you get a team of 6 or 8, you have to wear name tags on your jacket. You can also see we have a little sponsorship, So this is 2000. We're making some strides. We're moving the boulder forward. We're changing attitudes bit by bit. So you just, my word to you is just keep pushing the things that you need to do, and drown out those voices of naysayers. And eventually the pendulum can can change. We sail, we pull, we sail, we pull. This is the rhythm of our day. We go by hours. We're in 24 hours of sunlight. We don't go by getting up at 8 and stopping at 4. We go for 14 hours, and whatever miles we get, we'll take. And then we meet the day in the following day that comes to us. And we can shift that depending upon weather. So weather is sort of our indicator. We get to the South Pole. It's a little beyond our midway point, if you remember that bad map, where the T was a little bit longer. And I have to say, we're really happy to be there a second time. It's an extraordinary place to stand, but we're really uptight about continuing forward. So, and I'm sort of superstitious because I was going for the traverse in 92, 93, had to stop at the pole. So I want to get beyond this point, that imaginary line, and get to the second half of the journey and then celebrate this success. And that's when we get out the film canister. We still shot film in those days, and got out the aquavit for the Norwegian, and for the Irish, the Scotch. And we tipped one back. And if you look behind her bad hair, you'll see our position reports on the top of the tent. We kept track, because you're in a white world, you have no idea where you are. So it's a way to see the miles going by and the longitudinal lines. And we would celebrate big successes, big moments, and small successes. So you've got to meter it out. You cannot start this trip and think about the party at the other end, the other ocean, because it will diminish you very quickly. You've got to celebrate those small milestones and keep trucking. So this was a fairly big moment, crossing the South Pole, but we would also celebrate other days as well. But then the ceiling of our tent was a reminder that we're actually going somewhere. And so the rhythm continued, and we kept going. This is a glorious day where it was perfect for sailing, and it was flat. The flatness indicates how windy this place can be. The arms are up because she sees 2 dots on the horizon. And we know that that is not an hallucination from sensory deprivation. We know what they are. It's the Transantarctic Mountains, which means several hundred miles beyond, we're going to get to our little boat that's waiting for us at the other end. Now, that several hundred miles seems like a long slog when you're only going a mile or 2 per hour, but for us it was like suddenly within arm's reach. This is when we felt like we were going to do the traverse. And so that's the spontaneous arms go up. We have fun. So in the course of 30 minutes, we can cry and laugh all at once. I mean, this is a roller coaster of emotion, hard work, splendor. We feel so privileged to be there, and we're living out our childhood dreams. And so we have fun, we laugh, we sing. Nobody can hear us, it's great. We can't even hear each other, which is even better. And it's just a marvelous time, but it is also the hardest work we've ever done in our lives. When you start to come down off of the interior of the continent, you're going down a glacier. This glacier had never been gone down before. It's called the Shackleton Glacier. So we felt like an early explorer, because it felt like we were exploring new territory. The problem with going down a glacier is you don't see the cracks or the crevasses, and so we oftentimes had to get out of our skis and go very slowly, something we didn't want to do, slow, and get our crampons on and carefully go across these abysses that can come in any size, big canyons or small cracks like this. And so once again, Mother Nature slowed us down and made us appreciate, or not, our predicament. This is the Shackleton. The solar radiation in December had melted all the surface snow. I never knew this until I got there, and I've been reading about Antarctica for many, many years. So this is all very bumpy ice. It has big sun cups, they're called, in it. Horrible to ski on. We thought we were going to fly down this glacier and be to our boat in no time, lickety-split. and it's riddled with crevasses, and she is on sheer ice, and nothing is easy about it, and it was exasperating. I think the title in the book that starts off is called Hell, excuse me, because it was so out of what we were anticipating. This is what what is waiting for us at the other end. It's our little boat that's going to take us up to Tasmania and to warmer climates. This is a pretty small boat. It's not an icebreaker. The theory was that we would follow an icebreaker out of these icy waters to warmer waters and then scoot along. We were late, and so by the time we got to the boat, the icebreaker was gone. And these guys are really nervous. They felt like they were living the endurance story a little bit too closely as they're motoring around dodging the ice floe so they don't get locked in. So it's very exciting right up until the very end. The boat is literally docked to the ice. There's nothing there. There's no dock. There's nothing. It's just the way we came. The only thing that was great, after we took this picture, a penguin waddled by. So after 97 days, we finally get the payoff. We see the bird because there's nothing in the interior. I love this picture because, to me, it shows not all the other objectives that we had about largest educational program and getting across the continent, but one of our objectives that we explicitly stated on every paper was that not only did we want to do all those things, but we wanted to be friends at the other side. That was paramount to us. And it doesn't come for free. Even when you have everything in common and all of these things, it does not come for free. You've got to work at it every day. It's just like all of our relationships. And so I just treasure this shot. What it means, however, is that you start noodling other adventures, and that's exactly what happened to us. You give us a little glass of wine, and we start cooking up another journey, and we decided to go up to the Arctic in 2005 and 2007. In the meantime, we went back down to Antarctica in kayaks, and kayaked with the penguins and the seals, and then we did also paddled the Great Lakes, all with education embedded in everything we're doing. But we went up in this picture, this is the Arctic, and we're going down to the Big Chill again, or up to the Big Chill again. So friendships can get you into a lot of good trouble too. Because of climate change, and I won't dwell on this too long, but I just want to point out that this sled might look like the same sled you saw in Antarctica. But this is 2005, and this sled is now more like a canoe than a sled. It actually floats, it's watertight. So it looks on the exterior very similar. But we've designed it so that it can float with all of our heavy, heavy gear, and it is extremely heavy as we go up and down the ice. So when it opens up, and we know it's going to be much more open than in 1986, we'll have the ability to have it float across the open expanses rather than just sink into oblivion. It's a very different environment in the Arctic than the Antarctic. The Antarctic is a desert. The Arctic has high humidity, so you're frosty all the time and pretty miserable. It's much colder because of the season you're in. And then you have that shifting ice again. And with climate change, we're seeing things that, at a much more frequent things, four-leggeds more frequently than we had seen in earlier years. And they're having to go further out into the ice. Their curiosity is sometimes got a little kick of hunger in it as well. So there's different factors, but they're extraordinary animals to travel near, just not too near. And they're all over the Arctic. The open water is everywhere. I was astounded at the witnessing that we were able to see from 86. It was an entirely different Arctic Ocean and really quite alarming. We're not scientists, but we knew enough what was coming from the scientists to then design a suit that could go over all of our ski gear so that we could actually swim, something that we would never have considered in 1986. And it's exhilarating to be in all that chunky ice water that can close up or open up at any time. And of course, there's seals in there. And you never are cold when you're swimming. And it's not because you've really got your backstroke down. It's because your heart rate is sky high because you're on alert. Is the polar bear, we kept asking if they were colorblind or not because we didn't want to look like a seal. All the while, though, our mission is this. We're talking to millions and millions of kids, and with the advent of the technology getting smaller and more powerful, our classrooms are expanding. And it never fails. A good adventure is a great way to bring anyone of any age in, just simply because they're curious. What do you eat? How do you go to the bathroom? I mean, it can be fundamental questions like that, but it's a great way to then open up into a whole host of conversations. And they ignite us in so many wonderful ways and teach us. There's a story at the end of No Horizon that talks about these kids that we hadn't met before that helped us through a really dark time. They just intuitively knew. When we were up in the Arctic in 2007, Liv froze her feet, where all her toes were black, and we had to ski out because we knew we couldn't continue. It wasn't worth losing her feet for. And when we came home, our website was filled with messages from kids all over the world telling us that we shouldn't feel bad about only being out on the ice for a little over a week before this happened, that at least we had tried. And I thought, I went there to teach you that. And we needed the lesson. So it's no different than being in the classroom here. They teach you those poignant things. We're still working on a variety of things. This is an international team that we put together of women from every continent except Antarctica. And we've been going down waterways talking about freshwater issues, looking at creative ways that particularly women can look at solving some of the challenges before us. And so this is actually on the Ganges River we did a few years back. We went up in the Himalayas, started at the source where the glacier is receding, where the Ganges starts as a pure drop of glacial water, and then works its way through the canyons of the Himalayas and then down onto the plateau. And it was an amazing journey for 2 months. Nobody camps on the Ganges. Nobody goes down the Ganges. They cross the Ganges, but they don't go down it, let alone a group of 8 women. And so we did this for 2 months, always entering in schools, and we had curriculum that was translated and preceded us so that educators were trained, and they typically had not had much of a curriculum around the river. But this is a really, really important waterway for them. This is they often call it the Holy Mother Ganga. And so there's a lot of conversation happening about the collision of density of population, farming, and silt, and all of these things that are polluting the rivers, and yet everybody is using it for a source of both religion and life. And so it was interesting conversations for 2 months going down the river, learning, talking about waterways in our regions of the world, and seeing what some of the challenges were, and helping people feel empowered to take small steps to action. That's really what we were trying to do, is learn and engage, and try and take that back to wherever we were living, and up our, I like to say, up my own personal skin in the game. I like to say I'm an environmentalist, but there's always things that you can do better, and be more conscious of each and every day. And it takes work and it takes commitment. Language, when you're 8 women from around the world, all different colors and sizes and stripes, we had no problem communicating because we were such an oddity. And so it gave us an entree into places perhaps we wouldn't have been able to have entry to otherwise. one of the things I learned as the leader of this trip was that wherever we would go in the future, we would always have a woman from that country, not just that continent. So this is the backside of Krishna, our Indian team member. Whatever village, whatever city we were in, this would happen. They saw her and they saw them in her, boys and girls, men and women, doing something extraordinary, something beyond her own village, her own city, her own life. And they flocked to her. It wouldn't have been the same if it was just Liv and myself. And so this is why we put together an international team. But we saw the power firsthand. We kind of knew it and then saw it expressed again and again and again. And we knew we had to carry that forward. So when we went down the Yangtze River the next time, we made sure that we were going through the part of the Yangtze that our Chinese team member, Jiao Jiao, came from. But this is a boys' school. We are focused particularly on women and girls, but we're very boy-friendly. And we're a spectacle no matter what gender we are. This is a monastery, and we just had lunch, a spontaneous lunch. We got out of our boats and came into this saw a temple, and walked up, and we were invited to their class and then their lunch. We ate on a palm frond, very recyclable, and they pointed that out, and they're doing their dishes before they go back to study. We use the expedition with these water trips, and one of the reasons we're camping is because our expedition life is a way for us to come into touch with our consumption. So we too have to find the city water pump wherever we are. If we're in a goat field or someplace, we still have to fill up our water jugs for 8 people plus. And sometimes we got to walk a great distance to find clean water. And so this is my team filling up water for dinner that night and some bathing as we go. And it's a way to quantify the amount of this resource that we rely so heavily upon. And it became profound for us as well. It became less academic. And that's just some of the trips that lead me up to today. And hopefully there's many more to come. Liv and I keep reminding ourselves in our 6th decade that there's more work to be done, and we still feel that we have energy to explore what that might be for some time. But we're also quite aware that we're leaving this world to new generations, and so our work is starting to focus on that responsibility and really focusing on, again, the engagement element to what we all can do to play a role in making this world a little bit healthier. Young and old, we have that responsibility as citizens of the globe, no matter what age we are. If anything that you learn when you walk 1,800 miles across Antarctica, one step in front of the other, is that it matters. So there is no one thing that is small. There's no bit part. It comes to voting, it comes to getting involved in whatever way you can, and it comes from personal responsibility. And I think I learned that again, it was fortified on the Ganges for me, about what it is that I can do even further in my behavior to be a better citizen on the globe. And so Liv and I are continuing to navigate the kinds of works that we hope to do, always with an eye on raising up particularly women and girls' voices to keep pushing that boulder forward. And so I'm delighted to be with all of you on the early eve of Women's History Month and of a great storm a-brewing. And I'd love to open it up for questions. And I know there's microphones swirling about, but if you have a question, raise your hand or just shout it out. There's no formality here. We'll go for it. And I'll try and repeat it, and yeah.
At what point in your adventurous life did you start your foundation?
I started the foundation right after the first all-women's trip to the South Pole. To do that expedition in the 90s, we had formed a nonprofit, and so I had a board intact, and it was really to raise financial grant money for the curriculum. And when I got back, my board said, you know, there's a lot of organizations doing curriculum. I don't think we need to be in this business. And you've just become the first woman to both the North and the South Pole crossing the ice. I think you should focus in on girls. So get your courage up and let's focus in. That's kind of how they talk to me. And so we started the foundation. It was called the AWE Foundation after the expedition in those days. And then I went up on another expedition in the Arctic, and my board changed the name because they knew I wouldn't be wild about the Anne Bancroft Foundation. It kind of freaks me out to say it. So I call it the ABF. So we started in the early 90s. And I'm a charlatan there. I don't do anything. We raise money to give small monetary grants to Minnesota girls to have an experience. When I was 11 and 12, we lived in East Africa. And it changed not only my family, but it changed me as a kid. I saw a big world, and I wanted to be a part of it. And so in a small way, that's what we try and help girls explore, is just experiences. We're not asking them at the age of 12 to lock into a career choice. That's your job. That's your job. So it's very simple, but it's really a joy and a pleasure to be a part of. Yeah.
You had mentioned before that your college at one point had a space program.
Yeah.
So were there any other challenges like that, or even psychologically, through your time that you get worried about?
On that particular, is this on? Yeah. On that particular, I mean, every trip comes with huge challenges, and there's always that one sort of, I call it my moment of truth, when something looks so bleak. My moment of truth in '93 was turning around at the South Pole. It was kind of when I became a grown-up, I think. Sometimes it's an injury, like Liv's toes. That was more of a journey for her, a sense of failure, and then having to shake that feeling off, because there was no failure, really. It was a confluence of events that are out of your control that happen. And it was nothing that she did. She didn't make a mistake. It just happened. And we dealt with it, and I think we dealt with it in the right way. So, and she only lost half a toe instead of her whole foot. So, you know, and the Arctic is going to be there, so we can go back if we want to. But she can still ski and bike and run and do all of the things. Her quality of life didn't change. So sometimes it's around an injury, sometimes it's around a decision. Sometimes it's around a moment, like when you fall in a crevasse and you think that's it. But somehow, you know, the circumstances right themselves, and you do everything you trained for all those years, and it works out. But there are always lessons. The beauty about what I get to do, I think, is that I'm always learning. Which is so exciting and scary. And I never come out of these things the same person. Something is altered. And it's so interesting. A friend of mine wrote a song for me back in the 80s for the North Pole trip. And I think her verse was something like, you know, she doesn't like outdoor stuff, so it's pretty funny that she writes this very poignant song as if she knows what's in my brain. But she said it's a little of what you know and a lot of what you don't. So we can spend 4 years planning and preparing and being in the best shape and having the best gear and the best support behind us and all of this stuff. But you still don't know how you're going to be in that moment. And that's really where the exploration is. That's really where the adventure is, if you're willing to sort of meet it. And some days I feel very daunted by that idea, because I'm a chicken, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to change. What if I make the wrong decision? But it's really exhilarating when you hit that moment. And the kids, I got to say, 5 million kids keep you on your toes, because you're not just making the decision in a vacuum, and so you got to think about it if it's, when it comes to those kinds of decisions. So that's really scary too. So it's fun.
Two questions. Does she still live in Norway? I'm sorry.
She
Does she still live in Norway? And also, why did you not take dogs to Antarctica?
Two good questions. Liv still lives in Norway. She would not move here. She is Norwegian through and through. Can't get too far. It's an idyllic place. She's got the ocean and the mountains and a good long ski season and good health care. Oh, sorry. The dogs. In 1990, after Will Steger's expedition, an alumna of this great institution, he went across with an international team of men by dog team across from the peninsula all the way over to the other coast, longest expedition ever. And that was the last time dogs were allowed on Antarctica. Antarctica is governed, I love this place because it's governed by treaty. So nations all over the world have a stake in it and are part of a governing body. And so it's a collaboration. How unique. It's very like Ursula Le Guin, sci-fi. And so the treaty nations got together in the early 90s and decided that it's too risky. The ecosystem is just so incredibly fragile, so that really the dogs that were down there were working on the scientific basis. They were a mode of transportation into the field. Snow machines were sort of taking over, but the decision was based on if a dog, for some reason, even though they're vaccinated and all of this, infected the seal or the penguin population in one way or another, it's curtains, because this is like a petri dish down there. It's just so fragile. So they outlawed dogs. In 1992, when I went, we were actually planning on pulling sleds anyway, because dogs are so expensive. They need food and a doctor and a plane ticket and all of this, and you're going to the bottom of the world. So it's not as easy as going to the top of Canada with a bunch of teams of dogs. So we were already, because we couldn't find any money, planning on pulling sleds and going the old-fashioned way. And then they weren't allowed anyway. So that's why you see everybody pulling sleds now. That makes sense? Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah.
And on top of the pole, is there a survey marker?
Yes.
Okay.
Are you a geologist?
No, I backpack and I'm not a climate, so
Okay.
I find markers at the top. And survey markers are around us everywhere, but you have to look for them.
Yeah.
So I saw the pole and I was like, maybe that's a survey marker.
I love you. So this North Pole, you got to hold the flag. There's no pole, because of course the ice will melt and then it'll go to the bottom of the ocean. The South Pole, they put up a pole every year with a survey marker, and they really get arty with it. They make it, everyone is unique, and then the ice cap shifts. So when you get there, it's really cool because you can see pole after pole after pole in a line. And they have to get out their gizmos again, their GPSs, and figure out which is 90 degrees south, because the pole is unreliable. It's shifting with the ice caps. So it's a new pole every year. And it's made out of brass, I believe, like all of the ones that the DNR has and the Forest Service. And this guy, I don't know if it's a guy or what, but they really get very detailed with it. It's really pretty. And so each time you go there, it's a new one. And the flags that are around us, that's just ceremonial stuff that the base, but there is an American research station at the South Pole. And you ski there after 67 days or whatever it is to get there, and you pitch your tent by the pole, and you're not really allowed in because they're scared that if they let you in, then they got to let somebody else in, so they don't let you in, but then they start sneaking you in. Because they're really interested in what you've just seen for the last couple of months. And so they do sneak you in, but the high mucky mucks, they have, no. So it's very nefarious. It's really fun. And then we're gone. We scoot. I'm getting last question. I've been with this woman all day, and she knows me. And I love question and answers. And nobody asked how we went to the bathroom. Okay. Do we have one more? Quickly. Quickly.
You had mentioned travels in the boundary waters. With your experience in the Arctic and Antarctic, have you been there in the winter before? In the
Yes.
boundary waters?
Yeah. I love going to the boundary waters any season. I've been really jonesing to go up there in this winter because it's just it's really been a great winter, don't you think? Now, I'm dead serious. I just love this, and there's my buddy right here, and he's a big boundary waters guy. I just saw his shining smile.
Don't you ever want to go to Mexico or something?
I went to the Ganges, and it was really hot. So I want to do something tonight. Can I just have 2 seconds more? I know, it's a problem, but you guys are so enjoyable. So I was talking earlier about the people that help us get to the places that we want to go. And I'm just spotting one right here. No, I'm spotting two. Oh my goodness. So you're and so I want, there's one right here. I want the people that have helped me get to one end of the globe or the other. If you're here tonight, I want you to stand up. Because this is extraordinary. Stan, Susan, Carrie. Namaste. So Stan was our expedition lawyer on, and I didn't know they were coming. This is so great. Stan was our expedition lawyer, but he didn't really want to be a lawyer. He wanted to be a writer. So he did all the writing because you can report from the South Pole or the Antarctic or whatever, wherever you are. And so you have that auditory on your website, but then somebody's got to flush out the meat on the bones. And that was Stan. And that was his passion work. Writing out the contracts was sort of like, oh, okay. And Susan came on. Oh my God, Peyton, is that you? Okay. And Susan came on and she had to manage me. And that was really hard because I don't take direction very well. So you can see it's like a group. And Carrie came back. Carrie helped us in 1992. She was our nutritionalist. And not only did she guide us on the right kind of calories and proteins and all these things that I never heard of before, because I just eat whatever's in front of me, but she found a very creative way for us to, I don't know if you remember this, but a very creative way for us to get calories, because you only have really 2 hot meals in a day. And they got to be really compact and quick. And she went to these old folks' homes and she got this, I don't know what it is, but it's that supplement that goes in. It's kind of tasteless, but it's a lot of calories because some elderly people aren't eating enough. And we would infuse this powder, this tasteless powder, into our oatmeal, into our hot chocolate, to keep the calorie count up when we couldn't get it in other means. And we still lost a little weight. I'm not suffering there. So this is part of our posses that help make these things happen. And what a joy to see you all 4 of you here. And I have to say, again, thank you so much for having me on campus all day. It was a treat. What a great way to start Women's History Month for me. Now I can go into all those 5th grade reports with new vigor. and answer those same questions. And it's really a treat to be here and to be a part of this lecture series. What a special place you have. If you have not been at the Dummer Center, please go over there and visit them. They are doing extraordinary programming, and it is a warm and welcoming place, as is the whole campus. So thank you so much.